last bits of business. The first is to thank the AGBU New England for co-sponsoring tonight's program and for making us feel at home for the past year and a half, nearly. And that means thanking our Abolished, who conveniently just walked into the back of the room, regional chair of the AGBU New England. Thank you. The second is for me to turn over the rest of the evening to our moderator and to our distinguished speaker. Our moderator, George Aghjayan, is a member of NAASR's Board of Directors. He is the chairman of the ARF Eastern Region Central Committee. He is the director of the ARF Archives in Watertown. He is a researcher and writer, and he is one of the prime movers and shakers of the Armenian genealogy conferences, of which the fourth will take place in California in November. He's a busy guy, is George, and he is a repository of all sorts of information and knowledge, much of it accurate, I would add. And when tonight's program came into being, it was clear that he was the right person to introduce the speaker and to offer some reflections of his own on the topic that Raffi Bedrosyan will presently address. So with that, please welcome George Aghjayan.
Thanks, Mark. It's always nice to hear you say nice things about me. It's a little self-serving, but I'm going to just say, look, these programs that NAASR puts on, really fantastic content that you can't really get anyplace else. When you look and add it up, and the things that NAASR is involved in, where the breadth of that is really amazing and a testament to all of the good people here that devote their time to it. So, and if you haven't looked through the latest newsletter, I think it's well worth to see all the projects that go on, because it really is amazing. So I think all of us at NAASR are just so excited. We can't wait to get into the new building. It's going to be a fantastic thing. So tonight, look, I think locally, a lot of people probably look at me as somebody that, as going a lot to Western Armenia, writing a lot about Western Armenia and all of that. And that's in a small way true, but it pales in comparison to what our speaker does. Quite honestly, for myself, this is, I can't say it strongly enough, my admiration for all he has done and the work and the effort he's done to educate people about what's happening in Western Armenia, the Armenians that still live on our ancestral land. And I'll be quite honest, in fact, when the project Renovate Sugiragos was first mentioned, that I had first heard about it, I was not particularly supportive of it. I didn't have the vision that Raffi does. I really didn't have the vision. It wasn't until I went for the opening, and then 3 weeks later, I was again back in Diyarbakir for a conference organized by the Haran Think Foundation. And then, more to the point, every time I went after that, the hundreds of people that would be, in a day, there would be more than 100 people that went through that church, wearing Muslim attire, lighting candles. That church really served as a hub for that community in a way that I didn't appreciate before it was done. And I know Raffi had that vision, and he's the one that was really the catalyst behind it. I just give him so much credit for doing that. So I know you came here to hear him speak, and so I'm not going to give a long, I'm just going to briefly highlight a few things, but I wanted to say those personal comments from myself. And again, my family is from there as well, so it was particularly moving for me to be there, where my grandmother was born, and seeing what that was happening. I have relatives, to this day I have relatives that live there. So it was for my family that Raffi did this, and I really, I count myself fortunate to know him. He's a civil engineer, and again, another common link, I guess, because I went to an engineering school, Worcester Polytech, although I wasn't an engineer, I was a math guy. I don't have his musical talent, though. He's a concert pianist, and he's played in in the church at Tsukiragos. And I think that's just another aspect to the person he is. Again, he was behind the opening of Tsukiragos, but really he has initiated the Project Rebirth, which is all about, and I think that's what he's going to speak about, but it's about our people still living on our land, okay? Those that were forgotten, or thought they were forgotten by us in all the years where we were absent from those lands. And I think that through his efforts and the efforts of others, we're bridging that gap today. So without further ado, I invite my good friend.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, my friends. Thank you, George, for your kind words. And thanks, Mark and NAASR and AGBU for organizing this event. I'm really honored and privileged to be here to present to you perhaps an old but new topic. The book that I wrote is a collection of articles, and mostly they're about hidden Armenians. Who are hidden Armenians? Hidden Armenians are the orphans from 1915 who survived the genocide and were left behind in Turkey. And they were taken by the Turkish state or the leaders of Ottoman Empire to orphanages. Like this one, where the boys and girls were given Turkish names. They were banned from speaking Armenian. If they were heard speaking Armenian, they were beaten up. And the boys were circumcised, and eventually they became forcibly Turks, Muslim Turks. The boys were, quite a few of them, were taken to military schools. This gentleman, Kazım Karabekir, is the Eastern Army commander, and under his jurisdiction, there were 60,000 Armenian orphans left. And he took 4,000 of them into military school and trained them as Turkish soldiers. Some more pictures like that. And they became Turkish army soldiers. But the worst was Armenian orphan girls. Slave markets were abolished in Turkey in 1908, but they were reopened in 1915, and these girls were sold as slaves. Tattoos were put on their hands and foreheads, and they went for the price of a lamb. But girls from wealthier families fetched a higher price because whoever took this girl as an adopted daughter or second, third wife or a maid, then also became the owner of the possessions of that wealthy family. So these were, we can call, the living victims of the genocide. For you to understand what it means, living victim, just imagine a girl living in an Armenian village, playing with her friends and sisters, and suddenly Turkish soldiers come, they murder her parents, and they become her new parents. So the murderer of her parents becomes her new parents. And those murderers take over her house, and she's forced to live with the murderers of her parents. She grows up, she's forced to marry a Turk. She's forced to have kids from this Turkish person. But she never forgets that she has Armenian roots until one of her grandchildren becomes a lawyer. And that secret she passes to her granddaughter, the lawyer, and asks her to find her long-lost sister. And this lawyer is Fethi Echetin, who is Hrant Dink's lawyer while he was alive, and now the family's lawyer. She's one of the most prominent human rights lawyers in Turkey. And Fethi Echetin, like a detective, tries to find her grandmother's sister, and she eventually finds her in New Jersey, but by this time, Fethi's grandmother has already passed away. So she wrote this as a book called My Grandmother. So these hidden Armenians, they kept this secret and passed it on from generation to generation for 4 generations. Most of the time, they passed on this secret just before they passed away to their kids or grandkids. But they secretly kept this identity until the past 10 years or so, when certain things happened in Turkey which gave them the courage to come out. And my book explains these events. What was left behind in Turkey, what was left behind in Turkey was not only these orphans or the hidden Armenians, but more than 4,000 churches, more than 800 schools, and most of them disappeared. If not burned or destroyed outright, they were converted to mosques or Turkish schools, banks, banquet halls. In one case, even a church was converted to a whorehouse. And the largest of these left behind churches was the one in Diyarbakır, Dikranager, called Surp Giragos. And until 2008, it was in this situation. In 1915, when the Armenian population of Diyarbakır was driven out and murdered immediately outside the borders of Diyarbakır, they didn't even have a chance to go to Derzor. The Ottoman army took over this church and started using it as their military headquarters. And the German officers attached to the Ottoman army demolished the bell tower with artillery fire on the excuse that the bell tower of a church shouldn't be any higher than most minarets. So in 2008-2009, a few friends organized the reconstruction of this church, and within 2 short years, the church was reconstructed after taking all the permits and fundraising in Turkey as well as worldwide. Also the local Diyarbakır municipality participated in the fundraising. And in one weekend, this happened in 2011. That opening weekend, 4,000 people showed up. And as George said, some of these people are, of course, from Armenia, from Istanbul Armenians or diaspora Armenians, but vast majority of them are people in appearance Turks or Kurds. As George said, covered the head or the scarves for the women. And it turned out that they are all hidden Armenians. And this church became a magnet, and these hidden Armenians found courage to come together quite often. Monthly breakfast meetings were organized. They started sharing stories. They started helping each other, supporting each other, and they found the courage, as I said, to return to their identities, Armenian culture, language, as well as, in some cases, Christianity. This is the finished church with the new bell tower. And every time there were events organized at Easter or Christmas, the numbers multiplied. First year there were only 300 choreks made for the first Easter. More than 600 people showed up. Next year 600 choreks were made, 1,100 people showed up. So it was more and more. And these people came not only from Diyarbakir, but from regions like Van, Urfa, Antep, Mardin, Sasun, all area hidden Armenians started coming together. And it became apparent that these hidden Armenians tried to keep their identity by trying to marry their kids to other hidden Armenian families, if possible, or trying to do business with one another. So now they found more courage to do these things. I gave a couple of concerts in the church, first one for fundraising for the bell tower. But the second one was in 2015 in the centennial of the genocide, where all these thousands of people that you see, some of them are Kurds, but most of them are hidden Armenians commemorating the Armenian genocide, the centenary. I gave another concert that night, and I played Gomidas, Khachaturian, etc. And more than 1,000 people showed up, all hidden Armenians except the dignitaries. In order to encourage them, we organized Armenian language classes, and in order to encourage them even further, I organized a trip to Armenia for the graduates of this Armenian language class from Diyarbakir. That was the first trip, which was followed by several other groups from different parts of Turkey. And with the cooperation of the Armenian Diaspora Ministry, they were taken to different historic areas of Armenia. These people vary in age from 9 years old to 80 years old. They are doctors, lawyers, retired people, housewives, teachers, different socioeconomic categories, but they have only one thing in common. They are all hidden Armenians who want to come out and return to Armenian roots. So I'll just go through. These are places that we took them to: Sardarabad, Karni, Keghart. And every morning before going to these places in Armenia, Armenian language classes were organized. And some of these people are from Hamshen area. Hamshen is northeastern Turkey, the Black Sea coast. And these Armenians or Hamshen people, they are originally Armenians from many, many centuries ago, and they're completely Islamized and Turkified. But interestingly enough, they still speak a dialect of Armenian. But they are brainwashed that the language they speak, the dialect they speak, is not Armenian, but is a Turkish dialect from Central Asia. This is how they are brainwashed in the education system, that the language they speak is a Turkish dialect from Central Asia. But recently, the past 15-20 years, they are obviously finding out that what they speak is the Armenian. Some of the old people. And I will just tell one or two stories about these hidden Armenians who found their roots. This young man, Selim, is from Sasun. And he came to Armenia with me. And he had one letter in his hand, a letter written in Armenian from Armenia that was sent to his family in 1940s, 1950s. And with that letter, we tried to find his relatives. And after like many investigations and questioning this and that, we found his relative, and within half an hour, 45 people were crammed in an apartment in Yerevan, welcoming their long-lost relative from Sasun. I arranged for him to continue his university education in Yerevan. So his name was changed, of course, from Selim to Sebag, and he stayed in Yerevan, continued learning Armenian, and he learned Armenian so well that in the next year's group that I took to Armenia, the government of Armenia appointed him as one of the official guides to the group. These hidden Armenians, they showed the courage to return to their Armenian roots, but becoming Christian is even more risky or dangerous. In Islam, abandoning Islam is punishable by death. Especially in rural areas, it is really forbidden to give up on Islam. However, a few people showed the courage also to return to Christianity. The gentleman is a teacher in a state school. His name was Sami, but he learned that his grandfather was Stepan, so he wanted to become Christian Armenian. The lady had a different, even more risky situation. She was married to a very devout Muslim Kurd, and the husband had told her that if you ever think of converting to Christianity, don't come back, stay in Yerevan. But her father, just before he passed away, had asked her to promise that she will become Christian. So she was caught between these two difficult obstacles. And until the last night before we went to Aghjayan, she was saying, no, I cannot do this. But on the morning when we were driving to Aghjayan, she said, I want to do it as well. So instead of one, we arranged for 2 Baptists, 2 Christianings in Aghjayan. And her name was Rahime. She became Angel, her grandmother's name. One thing I should tell you that the pressure on these people is from their neighbors, obviously, from their work, but also from their own family, because if there's a hidden Armenian who wants to come out as Armenian, all his relatives, his family will also be exposed as Armenians, even if they don't want to come out as Armenians. So there's tremendous pressure on them not to reveal their Armenian roots. These trips we organized, I organized a few of them, some from Dersim area. And in Dersim area I took 15 people, but very significantly all 15 were elected officials in Dersim, in villages and towns. So there are, if hard to believe, hundreds of villages who are populated by Armenians who have become not Christians but Alevis in that area. Alevis are a different religion from Islam. In Mush, there are these new organizations. So all these people are now in contact with me and with one another more significantly. And as George said, we call this movement Project Rebirth. And there's a vast network now of tens of thousands of people who are in touch with one another, encouraging or supporting. and Hamshen Armenians, as I said. So these trips were being organized from 2014 and onward, several groups. However, all these things came to an end in 2015, June, when the Turkish elections brought these results. And the green areas, green provinces, are the ones where the pro-Kurdish party won majority. And this caused some sort of panic in the Ankara government, because if you look at it for a moment, Turkey lost control of the borders with half of Georgia, Armenia, Iran, Iraq, and half of Syria. So these border towns, border regions, provinces were under the control of Kurds. So also encouraged by these results, Kurds also wanted increased rights, increased autonomy, which resulted in response from Ankara very violently. And the army moved into eastern and southeastern provinces. And all population, not only the Kurdish militants, but civilian population suffered, including our hidden Armenians who live in these regions. These are not pictures from Syria or Iraq, they are in Turkey. So people were still trying to live in the basements of places like this. Unfortunately, as I said, the word Armenian is used as an insult word, swear word in Turkey. Even Turks, two Turks, when they are fighting with one another, as an insult, they call each other Armenian. So in order to provoke the Kurds even more, on the wall, this is written by Turkish police forces, it says Armenian bastards. The Surkiragos church also suffered. History repeats itself. After 100 years, the Turkish army and the police forces moved into the church as their military headquarters, and they directed their military operations from the church. The church is not damaged much, but all its possessions around, like shops and residences which belong to the church, they were all destroyed. And those historic narrow streets leading to the church all around that neighborhood were opened up, and all buildings were demolished so that the tanks can move in these areas, because the streets were so narrow that the tanks couldn't go through. And the church, in addition, it was expropriated by the Turkish government. But immediately our Armenian Foundation challenged the legislation of expropriation, and after several tries going to the Supreme Court of Turkey, the ownership of the church is back in Armenian hands again now. And after several discussions with the Turkish government, both from here, I mean from Canada, through the embassies or the ministries, as well as from inside Turkey, we convinced the government that these policemen or army should move out of the church and reconstruct again. I will show you some pictures. The policemen, when they stayed in the church for several months, they desecrated the church. See, they put their the seats against the windows as protection against the Kurdish bullets. They slept in the church, and unfortunately, even though there is washroom in the church, instead of using that, they were using the altars as washrooms. But anyways, so the church is now under reconstruction again, this time by the Turkish government their financing, but using our own architects and restoration specialists. And we're hoping that in 3-4 months, the church will be completed again. Now, in the book, I also have a few different examples of what hidden Armenians are. As you know, Bosphorus makes Istanbul beautiful. Bosphorus divides Europe and Asia. And what makes Bosphorus beautiful are the magnificent buildings on both coasts, or European and Asian coasts. There are palaces, schools, mosques, churches, private residences, and most of these are constructed by the architect family, famous family called Aghjayan. However, until the 2000s, if you went to Turkey, official guides would explain to you that these magnificent buildings are constructed by the Italian Bagliani family. But now they don't deny it anymore. However, this shows that history is so distorted in Turkey. I have a personal story about Bosphorus as well. I went to an American high school in Istanbul called Robert College, and there were every year, every fall, swim races from Asian side to the European side across the Bosphorus. I also participated in this race, and it's organized by the sports director of Robert College, who is a very famous sportsman, one of the most prominent wrestlers in Turkey, gold medals in Olympics and Europe. First person who established gymnastics in Turkey, etc. A very respected, severe, disciplined person. And in this race, I was lucky enough to come in third among the high school students. And this very stern, serious sports director came, congratulated me, and whispered in my ear a word called abris. At that time, I didn't give importance to this. I said, probably he knows I'm Armenian, and that's why he's saying abris, which means, you long live, congratulations. It's a word like that in Armenian. 40 years later, when he was almost 93, he revealed that he is an orphan from Bursa, Armenian roots. And a few months after that, he passed away. That's this gentleman, Abbas Sakarya. Continuing my own little story, I didn't know anything about genocide when I was growing up in Istanbul. Until 17 years old, I didn't know what happened to the Armenians or what happened to my own family. But in that Robert College again, there was a competition to come to US as an exchange student. And in the last interview, the Turkish teacher asked me, if you go to US and they tell you lies like Armenians are killed by Turks, how are you going to answer? And I said, I will tell them whatever I learned in my history books. And of course, there's no internet at that time. History books only tell the Turkish version. And my family didn't tell me anything about what's going on. But I talked to my grandmother that night after the interview. And for the first time, she revealed that she was living in Bursa in 1915. She was pregnant. Her husband was in the Turkish army as a pharmacist. And the order was given to deport all the Armenians in Bursa. and she had to march, pregnant, after several weeks near Konya. She gave birth to a boy, a baby boy, but of course there's no food or water under the heat, there's no milk coming, and the baby only survived 10 days, and she had to bury the baby under a rock and continue with the prodding of the bayonets of the gendarmes all the way to Damascus, Syria. And she miraculously survived even during the war, and she returned back to Bursa after the war, but her house was taken over by Turkish Muslim refugees from Anatolia or from Balkans, I guess, and they gave her a big beating and maybe even raped. And so this was the story when I heard. That's when I decided to come to Canada to start my university education, and that's how I found out about my roots. But even though I came to Canada, my parents continued staying in Istanbul. They say that we are too old, we cannot come, we're gonna die here. So in order to take care of them, I had to do the compulsory military service, because it's compulsory there, and no matter what age, you have to do the military service if you want to visit Turkey, and I had to do that in order to take care of my parents in old age. So I went into the Turkish army. The reason I'm telling you this is because during the day after we marched under the heat in Burdur, in the evenings, we were given lectures from professors sent from Ankara, and they would invariably ask, who are the enemies of Turkey? And people would say, Soviet Union, Iran, Iraq, Syria, Bulgaria, Greece, all the neighbors are enemies. But then the Turkish professor would say, no, the biggest enemy of Turkey is the Armenians. They have killed the Turks in 1915. They have stabbed us in the back, and now they are trying to assassinate our diplomats. So every night these brainwashing sessions would happen, but fellow soldiers would come after and talk to me and say, we know that these are not true. We know that we are living in an Armenian house. Our village was all Armenian. So all these stories would come out afterward. Just to conclude, I want to observe that, as we know, genocide is destruction of the oppressed people by the oppressor people or state. But in the case of Armenian genocide, unlike the Holocaust, genocide is also construction of the oppressor people and state. Turkish leaders, especially the İttihat Terakki leaders, they knew that Armenians were intelligent, and Cemal Pasha has quoted this, that it's good to mix Armenian into Turks, because Armenians are hardworking, intelligent people. It will help Turks if we mix Armenian orphans into our race. So what we're trying to do is to reconstruct the oppressed people by this Project Rebirth idea, and all these thousands upon thousands of hidden Armenians are getting organized, or were getting organized, but the past few years they're back into hiding again. But the organization is continuing. They are learning Armenian instead of going to these organized Armenian language classes. I've arranged for Armenian Virtual College, you know, the AGBU online program. people in Diyarbakir, in villages, in Van, they are registering, and I've arranged for it to be free for people applying from Turkey. So the Armenian language at least is being continued, and we will restart these tours to Armenia soon again. Now, I want to leave you with a couple of questions. The reason I wrote this book, all the articles that I had about these hidden Armenians, I put them together in this book. But I had two questions. I don't have the answers perhaps, but I want all of us to ask these questions. Who is an Armenian? What are the requirements for becoming Armenian? Do you need to have Armenian parents? Do you need to be Christian? So these are questions which are now being asked. And secondly, even more important, who decides that somebody is Armenian? Is it the government of Armenia? Is it the church? Is it Aghjayan? Is it the Istanbul Patriarchate? Who has the right to decide if somebody wants to return to Armenian roots again? So these are questions. I have my own answers, obviously, personally, but these are questions that we should ask as a diaspora or as community leaders, because this is a new reality that other than Armenians in Armenia, Artsakh, and diaspora, now we have a new reality, a new fourth group of Armenians, which are the hidden Armenians. Thank you. If you have questions.
So a few thoughts came to mind as you were speaking, actually a lot of thoughts, but I just want to point out one thing, that, and I'm just trying to envision most of you hearing this talk, most of you that maybe haven't traveled. I mean, I know some of you have, Steve and Harry have traveled and have had these experiences as well. But it's, for most people, it's somewhat of an abstract, it's almost like it's impossible to even imagine what Raffi is describing as an Armenian, because we had forgotten about all of those people. We had counted them as part of the 1.5 million dead. So for 100 years, they've been in the column of deaths, not in the column of living. But they didn't die. It's just that we didn't know necessarily what had happened to them. Or maybe even in some cases they did. The story that Raffi described is actually all of our stories, right? It's all of our stories of family that we don't know what happened to, right? We presume that they have been killed, okay? Whether it's my grandmother's sisters that were on the march and never heard from again. Or in this case, my great-grandmother had a sister who was taken during the genocide, who my family didn't know about. And in reading the book about the village recently, in the back there was a section about my family. And it actually had 2 paragraphs, and it said specifically that their mother, the youngest sister, Vaskanish, and a brother, Khachadur, we'd never even heard of either of these children, were thrown into the Euphrates and killed. But they weren't. And the sister survived, and she married, had children, and her children DNA tested, searching for their Armenian relatives. And they found me, and I found them. And it so happens that it happened right at the time that Raffi's talking about, that things changed. I was in Istanbul for the election there. I was an election monitor for the HDP party, had invited us, and I represented the ARF there as an observer. And I stayed behind, and I spent a week in Derzim, and then when I came home there was this match waiting for me, this DNA match. So what I'm trying to say here is that this is all of our stories. Even if you haven't, you're hearing what Raffi says, you're hearing that this has happened to me, but there are others that multiply that 100, 1,000, more times that, 10,000, 100,000, a million. Those stories are all our stories. And when you travel around and you do meet the people there, and you do hear their stories, you find out that they are thirsting, they are desperately thirsting to connect with their Armenian families, so that they know, when I said it in the beginning, I'll repeat it again now, that they haven't been forgotten. They haven't been forgotten by their people. I think this is a fair statement, but this is the thought that was going through my mind as Raffi was just trying to, as a diasporan Armenian that has grown up, raised here, have only heard of the stories of their parents of Exodus, not of this story of what had remained. And I can tell you that the story is so much, again, of what Raffi spoke about. So in my family in Turkey, my great-grandmother's sister is one matriarch. One of her sons married a woman whose mother was also an Armenian. As he spoke, they tried to make these connections. The place where my great-grandmother was from is the place that Fethi Çetin actually grew up, Maten. And the other woman in the family, she was born in Havav, which is the village where Fethi Çetin's mother was from, in Palu. And right up until the 1930s, she was still corresponding with her brothers who lived here in Brooklyn, New York. They were writing letters in Ottoman Turkish in the 1930s, exchanging pictures. And my cousins had the photograph that was sent by their relatives in New York. So again, these stories are universal. They're not unique. They appear to be unique. You look and say, oh, that's his story. That's not my story. It's all of our stories. And that's I think the message I would want you to walk away with. But if you have questions for Raffi, I think he'd be more than happy to ask him. We'll start here.
I'm wondering whether the people there living there in that area, they have open access to the internet.
Yes, they do. Even though the Turkish government cuts the internet every time there is something negative about Erdogan, but they reopen again, so they do have
Some
access.
websites are blocked, though.
Yeah,
I think
Facebook, for example, sometimes
Wikipedia
they-
might even be blocked,
Yeah.
I think.
Yes.
So they can become members of like Facebook and try
Yes,
to...
definitely,
Yes.
definitely, absolutely. My cousin is on Facebook. That's how we talk all the time.
That's how I keep in touch with all these tens of thousands of people. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name's Hazel. I had something just happen to me, and that's why I'm here tonight, that was both exhilarating and extremely disappointing at the same time. The exhilarating part is a Kurdish lady just reached out to me from London 2 weeks ago. My great uncle was taken into the Turkish army and executed like a lot of young guys back then. He was married and had 2 kids. She was forced to marry a Kurd, being a widow, and her 2 kids were dead. The boy was killed, and the girl survived, but disappeared into the Kurdish world. Her granddaughter is the one from London that just reached out to me. Now, they're basically on Aghjayan's side of our family, because the male is being killed, but the lady survived, and this lady in London is now the connection. Long story short, the disappointing part, because that was exhilarating to me. Imagine getting that call. The disappointing part is, and I don't know if you've ever faced that, or we need to understand it as Armenians, is I was able to make the connection to the Khanami's family in Detroit, a big family in Detroit. They already were aware of these people when I reached them. I called them all excited, and they basically told me, now with them, they're Kurds, we don't want anything to do with them. They're thieves, they're trying to get our money, and you know, you shouldn't do anything with them. And I'm thinking, I never would have expected that. So we have to understand as Armenians too, it's great to identify who's an Armenian when we get to that point. There's going to be Armenians that are going to be, it's almost like a reverse genocide. You want to bury these people back into the ground when they are hidden Armenians, and they want to embrace us.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah, there are many occasions where Armenians refuse to do anything to do with these hidden Armenians. Not only here, but also in Istanbul. But Istanbul Armenians, quite a few of them, they see this as a threat, that these people will come to Istanbul and take over the churches and institutions, and especially the wealthy people who are running these institutions like their own empires. They feel that these people will come over and change the system. But you're right, yeah. But it is possible to. Sometimes these claims are also fake claims. Like some real Turk or Kurd would want to come here, and he says, "I have Armenian roots." So how do you substantiate that? But I have found out that by asking where it's coming from, the village, etc., it's very easy, at least for me, several times. I found out that what he's speaking, what she's saying is true, because the people that she mentioned, I was already in touch in Dersim or
I also was able to.
Yeah,
do
so
that,
it's,
it's easy to do.
but it's a complicated situation.
It is.
Yes, sir.
I know that there are several DNA data banks. I wonder if there's some kind of an organized effort to, I'm on the FTDNA and they have an Armenian section. People who supervise the Armenian, I know George knows about this. But I'm wondering if there's to cover these other people who are getting their DNA done in Eastern Turkey.
So yeah, you're only being compared to those that tested the company that you're testing in. I had originally tested it, Family Tree DNA, FTDNA as you said, because they do have the Armenian DNA project, and I felt like if somebody in Turkey was looking for their roots as Armenians, they would be drawn to that testing company. Plus that testing company does ship to Turkey and do it. I think since then Ancestry ships there as well. I don't think 23andMe will ship to Turkey. When you say coordinated, I mean it's part of this genealogy group is actually trying to make, we try and help as much. Believe it or not, a lot of times the memory of Armenian ancestry goes back prior to the genocide. The conversion happened even earlier, and that makes it really hard sometimes because all the records, everything shows this family is Muslim. There's no, and sometimes because the DNA dissipates very quickly. We're really at the opportunity for this is now. In 20 years it won't matter. I'm absolutely certain of that, okay? Because the DNA dissipates so quickly that they won't even show up as a match in 20 years. The descendants won't. Every generation it gets reduced. And if it's a fifth cousin relationship, how are you going to make that connection? For me, it came back as a first or second cousin. That's why I was able to make the connection. If I told you it was a fourth cousin of yours, how many in this room knows their family trees back 4 generations? 0. 1, 2, or Dave, but even then, you know it, Dave, but it's maybe not the way. Aghjayan probably wasn't the name. That's just, the occupation that they had. So actually making those connections can be very difficult. So this is it. This is the time to do it and answer your question. And the way to do it, there are some third-party sites. First of all, if you tested Ancestry, you can copy your results to Family Tree DNA freely. So you should get in as many databases as possible because that's really the key. But every time I go to Turkey, I bring DNA kits in the hope that we can test more people.
Yes.
Thank you very much for your presentation. I really appreciated it, and I look forward to reading your book. I have 3 very brief questions. One is related to the consequences of visibility versus invisibility. And you spoke about the equivalent of heritage trips for crypto-Armenians who come out, as the language that you use. I wonder if there are any, if there have been any consequences for them in the heritage trips, and whether the Turkish government, tried to interfere in those. That's the first question. The second is the geographic dispersal of crypto-Armenians, whether or not there's been any mapping of the geography. Are they primarily in rural or urban areas? And then the third concerns the ancestry codes about which Orhan Kemal Cengiz wrote in the media, in Al-Monitor first, but other places, whether or not Armenians have tried to use those ancestry codes in order to help trace their origins.
Okay, the last question, I'll let George answer. The first question was, were there any consequences or backlash for the ones who showed the courage to come out? And related to the second question, where do they live, these people? Most of them, they live in eastern and southeastern Turkey, or historic Armenia, let's say. And they live both in villages as well as in urban centers. And predominantly the population there is Kurdish. And Kurds are very receptive to this idea. In the past, even though they have been participants in the massacres or the genocidal acts, but quite a few of them, especially the educated ones, they realize the grave error and tragedy that they are responsible for, and they readily admit and acknowledge and apologize for their acts, even though they wouldn't come out and give back the assets, but they do acknowledge their role in it, and they are very friendly to the hidden Armenians who come out. This could also be because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So the Turks and Kurds are completely at odds right now, and Kurds see the Armenians as allies. So there is a lot of sympathy to them, especially in the areas, as I said, eastern and southeastern Turkey, where most of these people are. The ones in Hamshin area, they have to be more cautious, but and that's a very, very nationalistic or even fascistic Turkish area. And some of these people also have Greek roots, the Pontic Greeks, who have been forcefully converted to Islam. They have become the most vicious Turks and going after, the Protestant priest that they killed, or Grantlink's assassin came from that region. So, but a lot of the Hamshen Armenians who have decided to come out, they moved to Istanbul. And in Istanbul, there is huge organizations now, Hamshen Armenians, trying to keep the language, to register the language, or songs, dances, cultural events, etc. So it's an ongoing effort. Yes, sir.
I want to reflect on the questions that you posed regarding who is Armenian, how do we recognize that? My thought was that if somebody has got Armenian ancestors and they recognize themselves as Armenians, I don't think that it is anybody else's point of view to say that you are not Armenian. If they recognize themselves as Armenian, it's like if immigrant comes to this country 2 generations later, their grandkids, somebody asks them, are you American or not? Like if they want to say I'm American, they're Americans, So I think that question, I know we always ask among ourselves, that who is Armenian, whether somebody can be considered Armenian, but I think it is kind of a artificial question among ourselves, that we have. I'm not pointing at you, but I know we have that among our communities, we always ask that question. So therefore, my thought and my belief is that if somebody's ancestor, even father or whatever is Armenian, and they recognize themselves as Armenian, I don't have
I
to say
agree with you, and that's the right way, that's the way I think, but unfortunately, some community leaders or political organizations, especially the church doesn't recognize hidden Armenians, until they become Christian Armenians. So whereas, Armenians were Armenians before they were Christians, before 1700 years ago. They were more than 2,000 years before that, they were Armenians without being Christian. But the church doesn't recognize them, and especially the Istanbul Patriarchate has obstacles against these people. And I took people to baptize in Armenia, and I wasn't able to do on a couple of trips because the Patriarchate or the acting Patriarch had instructed or directed the Aghjayan, and Aghjayan complied with his wishes, and we couldn't baptize them.
Why is that? I don't
Yes.
understand that. Can you explain that?
Pardon?
I'm trying to understand that. The patriarch was against
Yeah,
someone saying.
his position, it's a personal position, not patriarchate, but his personal position is that hidden Armenians from Turkey, or any Armenian from Turkey, can only be baptized in Turkey by him.
Well, not to be baptized in Armenia.
Yeah, but his conditions for baptizing these people is that they have to come to Istanbul for 6 months, learn Armenian, learn Christianity, pass the test, and then these people are working, they have families, kids. How can they live their family in Diyarbakir and come to Istanbul to pass this test? If I want to be a Turk, a Muslim right now, it takes only 5 minutes for me to convert to Islam. I say a couple of things, and then I'm Muslim, accepted as Muslim. But I think this is artificially difficult.
If I can just add one thing to that, there is one other aspect to this that the Patriarch uses that he uses for his own defense in this. And that is that in Turkey, it's against the law to postulate to Muslims. And so it has to be that they, of their own will, are doing this without any incentive or encouragement or anything from the church. Otherwise, the church would pay the penalty. So this has been his primary excuse. I think it's a feeble excuse in the cases that Raffi has offered up, which are clearly the case. I think Raffi and I feel very strongly in agreement on this point. But that I'm just offering that as the other explanation that they will throw out there to say this is why we're not doing it. The Turkish government has this requirement on us.
Let's see what will happen after the
Yes.
Patriarchate elections. Let's see. Yes, sir.
Comment and question. Geopolitically, present-day Armenia may be concerned about where the loyalty, for the future, where the loyalties of some of these so-called hidden Armenians lie, and that's an important political question. My question is about General Karabekir, who of course attacked Eastern Armenia. How many orphans did he take charge of? What happened to the ones who didn't become military men? And what happened to the ones who did? Did these people keep their identity or not?
Well, the orphans under General Karabekir's jurisdiction, most of them were placed in Turkish homes, and they were even given some money to take care of these kids as long as they make them into Turks, Muslim Turks. And the ones that went into the army, they became vicious Turkish soldiers, devoid of any parental, motherly love. They became ruthless soldiers, quite a few of them, and it's not completely documented, but some of them apparently were responsible for the 1960 coup that toppled the democratic government and executed the prime minister of the time, Adnan Menderes. So this is hearsay, but there may be truth to that as well. Yes, sir.
I wanted to just comment on the church's role. There are a lot of implications to this. It's a remarkable story. Thank you for sharing it. And you know, it's kind of like you open the door one day and there's a relative in the door that you discovered that we never thought existed. One of the implications, you know, the thing I keep asking myself, what can we do? These are our people, our brethren. And whether we have relatives there or not, we have a responsibility. And I think one of the responsibilities is to put some pressure on the church through in a responsible way. But the church needs to get with it. I mean, I'm a proud member of the Armenian Church, but I'm embarrassed by not only their response to this, but on many things. I mean, you mentioned the word, I'm sure you're referring to Aghjayan. You know, this is the opposite of what we call leader, and is in cahoots with the Turks. So hopefully with the election we'll get better leadership there. But on the other side, in Armenia, we have the same myopic view of Armenian life. And I think it's appalling that the Armenian church looks at these people and says, only when you become a Christian will we even acknowledge you exist. These are human beings. And we have Armenian atheists today that walk among us. Is there a difference between an Armenian atheist, I mean a true atheist? I mean, we all know Armenian atheists in our community who have no concept of God at all in their life, yet we accept them as ethnic Armenians. They just happen to keep that view more private, right? Just because these people happen to be grown up as Muslims, we can't accept their ethnicity. This is a really challenging topic for us because we've grown up melting our ethnicity and our faith into one. You know, that's drilled in. You talk about what's drilled into our heads. You know, Vartanats and heritage faith. Well, now this is kind of breaking that apart a little bit because not all these people are going to become Christians. So the question is, how do we embrace these people as an institution, as an Armenian community, and get our church and other institutions to embrace? I think that's something we need to bring up. I've talked to many in the hierarchy of the church, not the vampire, but a couple of steps down. And it's absurd. The attitude. This has to change. These are our people. When we talk about Western Armenia, we have two things in Western Armenia today that are alive. We have the vestiges of our physical presence, the Nuran Cathedral, Ani, Akhdamad, Surgiragos, and we have these people. We have a responsibility to deal with that. So I think we should be putting pressure on our churches.
You're right, the churches, and I'll go one step further, also government of Armenia.
Absolutely.
That once somebody knows their ethnic background is Armenian, for whatever reason, oral history or from his parents, grandparents, if he knows he's got Armenian roots, and if he wants to return to Armenian identity, we have to embrace and welcome him. Becoming Christian is a choice. Whether it's the Armenian roots in him is not in his control. If he has it, we cannot deny it from him. Most of these people, especially the Kurds, the hidden Armenians who are Kurds, they are atheists anyways. Like they don't practice Islam. And they say we now want to become Armenian, but don't force us to become Christian. So the Aghjayan or the Vehapar is a bit more open-minded than the Patriarchate in Istanbul, but the government, the previous government as well as the present government, they are seriously considering this now, that if there is enough evidence that they have ethnic roots as Armenians, they are going to start accepting them as Armenian citizens without requiring Christianity or baptism, which was the requirement until recently. But every time I go there, I see there's different things. In August, when I talked to the foreign ministry and I presented these things, that was the consensus from all the decision makers, that we cannot have this requirement of being Christian to embrace these people. So things are moving on a positive way, I think. We'll see. Yes, Mark.
I have
sort of a devil's advocate question. Maybe because this is the second talk I've heard today that touches in part on Sophia-Ghost Church. And I admire what you and many other people did to rebuild that church. It must have been devastating to see what happened to it. But my devil's advocate question is this. If it were in a flood zone or an earthquake zone, would you rebuild it?
Yeah. It's a hard question.
Do you see what I'm getting at?
I know what you're getting at, yeah.
What are you getting at?
What I'm getting at is that it's in a place of essentially fundamental and inherent danger because of the stance of the government.
So I'll take a crack at this.
You, I didn't ask.
But anytime you ask a question, I have to stand up and respond. Anytime.
Give the man a chance to answer. He's
Well,
dying to answer.
Do you have your own, I'll let you go, but I mean, I just see what you're working on.
I will build it again and again and again. Not because it's a historic remnant or some sort of memorial for genocide, etc. But that church is a force which is attracting these hidden Armenians. And even if there's no priest there, priest comes. There were 35 Christianings happened there in the last few years. But it's a place where they can come together freely and get courage and energy from one another. So I'm still trying to also build in other places. There's something called Varakabank in Van, which has become a stable for cows, and earthquake even damaged it more. But if that's built as a miracle, I'm hoping it will, then in one region there are thousands upon thousands of hidden Armenians, and that would become a magnet for them. The more we try to build these things, I mean, in Sivas, in many other areas, Malatya, I think we shouldn't build them just to have cultural heritage, but it's like a beacon for these people, I think. So that's my answer.
That's a good answer. The only thing I'd say is if there's an earthquake zone, you say, oh, I'll move it over there, you're still serving the people. In this case, this is where it is. If you're going to serve the people, you have to be where they are. And the Kurds would always say to me, why don't you just keep rebuilding, you know? And it's hard for Armenians when you've lost so much to have that mentality, because it's like, okay, if I live there, yes, if it's my home, I will rebuild it. But if I'm here and I'm going to keep rebuilding it, it's a harder thing for people to understand. But I think Raffi's determination is what we need. You know, his determination is what's needed in this case. But they don't have to be of that size either. There are many chapels that could serve the same role.
And conversely, if we don't build it,
right,
the Turks are doing everything to wipe it out. Like in Van, they put toilets on top of a cemetery. Or they are taking apart whatever is left of certain churches. So we should have some sort of effort. And I'm very proud that these hidden Armenians now, who are still hidden Armenians, but Kurds, politically elected, local officials, or governor's office, they are the ones resisting, and they are the ones preserving these whatever is left. So in a way, like I don't want to disclose, but even in Ankara, very high people in Ministry of Education, Ministry of Culture, there are hidden Armenians who are secretly they are trying to help these things to be preserved. And I tell them, don't come out, like stay as Turk or Kurd, you're serving more by, because once they come out, they will lose their influence, etc. So it's complicated. Yes, sir. First, you then. No,
Okay,
you're third.
I had a little experience. I was in Bush about 5 years ago. And there was, I travel alone usually. And there was a Armenian lady from Armenia and her son. They're originally from Bush, their grandparents. And they were trying to get this particular town, they would want to visit cemetery. So hotel was trying, they couldn't understand each other that well. I was a little bit interpreter for them because I speak Turkish fluently, I hope. I used to. And he couldn't find it. So he turned around and he said, if somebody's coming tomorrow, he will know where the place is. So next morning, I stand in the front of the door, just waiting for that person to come. How do you know? He came in, and the guy asked him, he says, he told him exactly where the place is. It will take 20 minutes by taxi. And they said, we'll make the arrangements and everything. After they left, I asked that gentleman in Turkish, I said, how do you know this place? He looks at me, he says, where are you from? I said, I am from the United States. I never would mention America, United States. Good relationship we left. And he says, no. He comes close, he said, what is your background? I said, I'm Armenian. And he turned around, close to me, he says, yes, I'll hire.
Yeah.
I said, really, what happened? He says, there's a village here close by, 20 family lives there. We always tell people we're Turk, but we never went to mosque. We did absolutely nothing. Well, I said, 10 years ago, we decided we better tell the authority we are not a Turk, we are Armenian. And they went, they applied, they welcomed them. They were happy that somebody said it. And then 2 months later, another village up on the hill, they came down and they did the same thing. He says, now it's happening all the time. So all this area slowly is just waking up and they are introducing themselves as an Armenian. And that was a quite experience for me. Well, I wanted to mush for a certain reason, but anyhow, I saw what I want to say. But that was the most important things for me. And there's no desert a few years ago, and I ran into these 2 Arabs walking in the desert in April 24. And I cannot speak Arabic, but I asked somebody to translate, what are they doing here? You know what he said? He said, my grandfather was Armenian. He said, every April 24, I come here. So this is happening to many places. By the way, you went to school in Arnavutköy. Bebek. Well, I went to school in Beşiktaş.
Oh. You went to Roberts College, is it always called? It's one of the early missionary colleges, right?
Yes. It's the oldest American school outside.
Yeah, I thought so. Well, we're talking about the Armenian Church, but is the Armenian Evangelical Church and the Armenian Catholic Church doing anything regarding the hidden Armenians that you know of?
They are more receptive or more accepting this reality compared to the Armenian Apostolic Church. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
There is a school in
Sorry to talk about this a little bit. I was just wondering, are there Armenians still, significant numbers of Armenians still left in Central Turkey?
There's a church in there, to a matter of fact, very close to the Armenian Patriarch.
Significant numbers there as well.
I don't know the numbers, but there are. Yes, there are. And invariably, their children are in Istanbul, but in the provinces, the old people, there are still.
That's what I was going to ask.
Hidden Armenians.
If I wanted to find my grandmother's sister's grandchildren, Would I look there or would I look in Istanbul?
Probably Istanbul, yeah.
All right,
Like
with-
my grandmother's home.
No, we're gonna stop.
What can we do from the outside?
Well, am I not here? Go ahead.
Yeah, Harry was asking what can we do? Have an open mind and,
How was it? I was
I don't know.
Who's going to help your project?
If situations improve, I will start taking these people to Armenia again. Well, right now, I'm hoping that cultural organizations or political organizations or NGOs can take this initiative and do it rather than individuals, because my resources are limited, but we'll see.
I mean, are they doing it within Turkey themselves? You know, are they finding out themselves and one telling the other?
Yes, that's what's happening, yes. Yes.
They found Judge.
Let's thank Raffi for an excellent. Let me reiterate that you are welcome and in fact encouraged to purchase his book. It's available upstairs as well as other titles of interest. And there are flyers for upcoming events. Please take one. There are some copies of the newsletter, I believe, in the entryway of the building there. And there are refreshments. So thank you for coming and stick around.
Sergeant, I'm glad you spoke.